And our next speaker is Nrithya Jagannathan. Her topic is Rerooting Yoga, Reclaiming Sādhanā, T Krishnamacharya's approach to continuity in classical yoga, pedagogy. Your slides are already there. So to tell you a little bit about Nrithya ji, she's a senior yoga therapist from the Krishnamacharya tradition, and she was a direct student of renowned Yogacharya Sri T.K.V. Desikachar for over a decade. With over 20 years of renowned Yogacharya with over 20 years of teaching experience, she is currently the director of the KYM Institute of Yoga Studies, the training and certification wing of the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram. She has traveled extensively around the world to teach yoga, yoga therapy, and Vedic chanting, and she is a certified therapist from the International Association of Yoga Therapists. She is an expert advisor to the certification committee of the IAYT. She's also a professional Bharatanatyam artist with over 35 years of experience. So we were seeing that from the questions that she was asking during the other sessions, her knowledge of Nrithya was coming out, and she's named so appropriately. Over to you.
Jai Shri Mahakal. Gurubhyastad gurubhyascha namo vakamadhimahe vrinemahe cha tatradhyau dampati jagatampati Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. I think I stand between you and lunch. I'll try to keep this as tight as possible. I think my first slide tells you where I'm going with this. Just what I'm covering very quickly. I think all of us are aware of yoga's origin and evolution. I'm just going to briefly touch on these. My Purva Paksha essentially are certain very, very malevolent statements that come primarily from certain Western academicians that I think are needed to be countered from the perspective of pedagogy and continuity. Then I look at, from there, my Uttara Paksha begins. I look at the pedagogy of the Yoga Sutra itself, innate in the Yoga Sutra, moving on to why Krishnamacharya is important. Who was he? And why is this counter needed? So far, there has not been a counter from within the Krishnamacharya tradition. Then the continuity of this pedagogy as evidenced in the works of Krishnamacharya and in the teaching methodology of the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram. Moving on to the key concerns in modern day yoga, and therefore why a need to return yoga to its roots, why we need to re-establish this in modern yoga studies. Now very broadly, I think it's, as Dr. Mala indicated, there is antiquity of yoga, there is no doubt about this, that it comes from a pre-Vedic period perhaps, that the rishis were mantra drashtas itself indicates to their state of mind. And we see yoga through the ages. Here I'm essentially looking at literature. And so you have the Upanishadic tradition, you have the Darshana tradition, and then of course the Yoga Sutra, Bhagavad Gita, commentaries on the Yoga Sutra. It's a very long commentorial tradition. Moving on to, when it comes to literature, you see a big gap from the period of Patanjali. The first available extant text you see is Yajnavalkya Samhita, which is Yoga Yajnavalkya Samhita, which has some aspects of Patanjali, but looks at a number of other aspects as well. There is some mention of asana and so on. Then it's only in the 15th century that you have Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Now what has happened through all of these changes is that yoga is increasingly being presented as postural. And therefore the question, where is postural yoga? It's not found in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. Patanjali does not give you technique. Where are the techniques coming from? And therefore there are questions which I'm attempting to answer. Of course, we move on to other texts. Then the colonial period, there is massive mistrust of yoga practitioners, fear even. And subsequently, the role played by Krishnamacharya as a revivalist. What we miss in all of this is that yoga is embodied in Bharatiya Samskriti as a thought process, as a state of mind. And it carried through the Natha Paramparas. They are the preservers through the ages. They may not be literature, it is there in the practice. And yoga is an Anushasana Shastra. Now, when I was looking up my Purva Paksha, there was much that came up. I'm just culling out a few ideas. One is this from Norman Schoeman, the textual tradition from Patanjali is a dead textual tradition, he says. It was irrelevant even at the time of Vyasa. Then, assertions from a number of Western academics about absence of continuity, pedagogy in the teaching of yoga. 3. Specifically from David Gordon White in a book called The Biography of the Yoga Sutra, he claims that Krishnamacharya was not a scholar, did not have any knowledge whatsoever. You'll see what he says. And that the teaching methodology, the practice of asanas, comes from Western calisthenics and not indigenous to India. These are the claims that are being made. How can it be, in spite of his brilliance and extensive training, Krishnamacharya comes across as barely cognizant of the Yoga Sutra? India's North Indian Pandits, to the large extent, remain unschooled in yoga philosophy. None of Krishnamacharya's writings show evidence of progress beyond superficial and inaccurate treatment of the subject. These are claims that are made in the book. Further, he says there is no chanting tradition, because in the Krishnamacharya tradition, Yoga Sutra chanting becomes fundamental. He argues that it is a smriti, therefore need not be chanted. A lot of these ideas are baseless. And Desikacharya's defense of chanting. Desikacharya in his biography speaks of chanting the Yoga Sutra as a connection to the Guru Parampara. And he says it is just a way, he says it posthumously absolves his teacher of any need to clearly explain the meaning of the Yoga Sutra, something which he has never seemed to have done. Eventually, he speaks about the Yogavalli. Yogavalli is a commentary, a Sanskrit commentary by Krishnamacharya on the Yoga Sutra. It's a massive commentary. And he says he comes to it later only at the time of B.K. Iyengar, his student, gaining some popularity. These are the claims that I'm now trying to counter. Mark Singleton speaks of how the YMCA vision, you have J.H. Gray, who says there was no system or brand of physicalized yoga that could meet India's need. This had to be created out of what was available, including a large number of exercises hitherto not considered part of yoga: nature cure, therapeutic gymnastics, calisthenics, and bodybuilding. We must remember that all of this comes to India only post the 16th, 17th centuries. And when India built her own program of physical culture, one of the names she gave it was yoga. A lot of exaggerated attempt in Mark Singleton's work, Roots of Yoga. Basically, he says that it was the YMCA and this link method from Sweden that came together and synthesized as Krishnamacharya's teaching of yoga, and that the practice of asanas within the transnational Anglophone yoga is not the outcome of a direct unbroken Hatha Yoga lineage. These are the claims that are made. Now I come to my rebuttal. There is pedagogy inherent in the Yoga Sutra. This is undeniable. The text is attributed to Patanjali, roughly 2nd century BC to 2nd century CE. Now, where is the pedagogy? It is there in the first 4 sutras. You have the Chatussutri format in the Yoga Sutra as well. Atha Yoga Anushasanam. Where is yoga? Now is yoga. How is yoga taught? Anushasanam. What is Anushasanam? Anushasanam Guru Mukha Adhyayanam. There is adhikara. There is Krishnamacharya in his interpretation says atha indicates the adhikara of the teacher to teach. Anushasanam indicates the adhikara of the student who is a ready learner. It is in this space that yoga has to be taught. What is yoga? Chitta vritti nirodha. It is a state of mind. It is nirodha, the restraint, and then subsequently cessation of thought. If this is done, then what? Tada drashtuhu swarupe avasthanam. You understand your nature. If not, vritti sarupyam itaratra. The Purusha believes itself to be what the mind is showing to it. Finished. The pedagogy is there. And then the rest of the sutras unfold. I have attempted here again to... Can you click the next one, please? It's not changing it. Now, this is a very, very quick summary of the Yoga Sutra. I'm sorry, it's technical, but I have to do it. There is pedagogy. This is what Nagarajji asked me to demonstrate. He said, show the pedagogy of yoga. See, fundamentally, like with all the darshanas, sukha prapti, dukkha nivritti, avidya has to come down. Avidya is klesha, it has to come down. How can avidya come down? Something has to be done to remove it. If avidya is removed, viveka will come up. Viveka is discernment. Now the entire text is only about the process. And the teaching is layered. The first level of instruction, chitta vritti nirodha. How do you attain chitta vritti nirodha? Tada abhyasa vairagyabhyam tan nirodha. There is a practice component. The practice will create something in you. Along with this, there is a need for detachment, for dispassion. This will lead you to a state of mental focus absorption. This is for an Uttamadhikari, for someone who's already in this path. Now you don't get it. Patanjali will loop again, comes to the second chapter, Sādhanā pada, and he says, how do I attain this? I don't understand. Kriya Yoga, Tapaswadhyaya Ishvara Pranidhana. If I do it, what? Klesha Tanukaranam. Kleshas will come down, Samadhi Bhavam will go up. You do this. This is a mid-level Adhikari. Then there is the lower, the Adhama Adhikari, which is everybody else. And so he will again circle. After an elaborate explanation of Klesha, he'll come back and he'll say, there is this problem. Dukkham is our problem. Heyam dukkham anagatam. What do? Understand the cause of dukkham. Samyoga. Drashtri drishyayoho samyoga. There is a coming together of consciousness and mind. Understand their separation. Why is this coming together? Avidya is the cause. Root out avidya. If avidya is rooted out, kaivalyam is the outcome. How do I do it? Yoganga anusthane ashuddhikshaye jnanadiptihi aviveka kyate. Same approach. Bring down the ashuddhi. What is the ashtanga? Yama niyama asana pranayama pratyahara dharana dhyana samadhi. There is an organic process there. I can't just say I want to go into a samadhi state. It has to start with yama. It starts from the external circuit, social discipline, moral values, coming to personal discipline, personal rigor, then moving into body culture, because the body cannot be an impediment to sadhana. Then coming to pranayama, because in the absence of regulation of breath, there is no regulation of the mind. Pratyahara is an outcome of pranayama, withdrawal of the senses. All of this sets the base, eligibility, dharana, sucha, yogyata, manasaha. You are now ready. Now the journey begins. Again, there is another loop, that you don't assume that you've attained something great because you had this moment or this flash. Savitarka, nirvitarka, savichara, nirvichara. You have to go through this path. It's a laborious pathway. It is a pathway that requires working through your samskaras, working through all the stuff that is latent, refining the mind. The idea is that you keep moving on. Naturally, as there is sadhana, there will be siddhi. Interestingly, Patanjali tells us, te samadha upasargaha vyuthane siddhayaha. You focus on the siddhi, again come back. Start this loop again. You haven't attained your goal. Transcendence is the goal, and therefore Ritambara Prajna Vivekajam Jnanam. Finally, Purusha Jnanam. If this Vairagyam is sustained to Paravairagyam, Kaivalyam. Now this is the pedagogy. This is already there. This is what has to be translated into the teaching. Coming to my rebuttal. The presence, first of all, that Yoga Sutra is not a living tradition. 1,700 years of commentaries. We have 19 commentaries, sub-commentaries on the Yoga Sutra. I have given you a list here. Ample evidences. A big problem from the academics is that they are looking only at Samskrita sources. They are completely ignoring the vernacular, completely ignoring sculptural evidence, ignoring evidence in music. The work of the Vageyakaras, of Tyagaraja Swami, or where I think Dikshidhar says, Nada Tanum Anisham. What is the principle there? You have it in Kabir, in a 14th century Kabir, where he says, Jini, Jini, Bini, Chadariya. He speaks of Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna, and the process of pranayama. It is there in the works of Vinayaka Ragaval, of Avayar, of Avadayakkal, Sridharayaval. Everywhere you look at it, length and breadth of the country, yoga is already embedded. They are not looking at these sources, and they are speaking. These are some sculptures from the Pune district, which 13th century temples representing asana practice, and therefore predating these claims. Now coming to who Krishnamacharya was. Born in a lineage of scholars, you see there on the left, all of those are his qualifications. He studied in Benares for a very long period of time. Scholar of all the Shastras, Vedas, Veda Ghanapati, Vedantin, subsequently Yogacharya. He is the source of 4 styles, so-called styles of yoga. He never claimed to teach a style of yoga, but he happened to be the teacher of Indra Devi, B.K. Saingar, Patabi Joyce, and later Shri T.K. Vidyasikaachar, his son who studied with him for over 30 years. And therefore, he played a very important role in reviving yoga in a period where it was in decline, where the British especially had deep distrust of practicing yogis. And you see that there's an evolution in his teaching paddhati, but it never deviates from Yoga Sutra, never deviates from Shastra, never deviates from values of Sanatana Dharma. Most important, in terms of what new, as Nagaraj said, it was Krishnamacharya's vision that, yes, there is yoga as a darshana, but yoga for me, yoga for the common person. And he played a remarkable role in bringing yoga, making yoga accessible, saying that unless there is a foundational good health, where is the question of sadhana? Therefore, work on your body. And so Yoga Chikitsa, he is a pioneer. But in all of this, it is an integration of Yoga Sutra concepts. Asana, pranayama, mantra, japa, bhavana, dhyana, yatra, yama, niyama. All of this is a part of the approach. Krishnamacharya, speaking of his own introduction to yoga, he says, I was taught yoga through the act of eating by my parents. Prana Agni Hotram. This is where it began, because something outside joins something inside of me. Then began my questioning. Subsequently, he goes to Tibet to study. He says he studied over 700 asanas with his guru in Tibet. His guru knew several thousand. He did not come back with notes. Now, this is seen as a problem, because this is an oral culture. This is a man who had a photographic memory, but he says 700 asanas, and these people are saying, how is it possible? Where is the proof? The proof is in his head.
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Yes. There is archival records of a book that comes from his teacher's daughter, demonstrating asana. His depth of understanding on the Yoga Sutra is non-questionable. Iyengar himself writes in his foreword, he says that this was a man of a living encyclopedia, fount of knowledge in all the darshanas. Now, in his works, these are his works, some of his, I'm just pointing out some ideas. He says, this is based on the Bhajagovindam of Shankara. He says, Nahi nahi rakshati Kali Yuga Siksha. He says, look after your body, do what you have to do. This Shiksha will not help you. What Shiksha will help you? Focus on Piba Yoganjali Saram Nityam, Visha Yogasanam Amritam Geham. Do the asana with a bhavana of the divine. Meditate on that which dwells within. When you know that, this is one of his famous verses, if you know the tattva, there's no delusion. If you refine your mind, there is no disease. When you control your breath, there is no death. Therefore, practice yoga, and so on. There are many, many references. I'll be happy to share. All of these have to do, essentially, they are synthesizing Yoga Sutra teachings. Yama, niyama, the same pedagogy follows throughout. What harm can an agitated mind not do? What does useless talk achieve? As long as the mind is clear, there is happiness here and everywhere. This is a statement on the Ashtanga and so on. Now, just coming to the present very quickly, this is still the paddhati that we are following. There is a formalized teacher training program to answer a need of supporting the education of yoga chikitsakas. 900 plus hours, swadhyaya becomes a major part, one-on-one mentoring, chanting. We are all expected to know all the sutras by heart. You have to chant. And they study history and evolution of yoga. Our approach is a layered approach. Asana, pranayama, dhyanam. Then we come to course design, teaching methodology, ethics, and understanding the roots and evolution of yoga. Personal practice, samyama, swadhyaya, personal practice, mentor feedback. And this is a continuing relationship. Now, coming to the present day scenario, I'm just closing with this. I think this is very well known. What's happening is a loss of this paddhati. Modern studio culture has absolutely no clue of paddhati. Very bad translations. I'll just give you one example. Okay, there is yoga supermarkets. Now, this is offered by something called Diva Yoga from one of our actresses. Just look at the bouquet of ladder flow, Ashtanga inspired. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff here. Yoga certification. This is a big problem currently, because what's happened is yoga has been brought under beauty and wellness under the health sector skill council. It's become a skill, and therefore you have, this is, Yogasana is under the national games. It is equated to Kabaddi and Kho-Kho. And you have job appointments. These are government placements where you have a yoga quota, yoga asana quota. And therefore, there is a need for this paddhati. I'll just give you one example. As an examiner, I asked someone, see basically how they study the sutra, I do asana. What are the asana sutras? Sthira Sukham Asanam. That's all they will know. So I asked someone, what is Sthira Sukham Asanam? Oh, you have to do the posture perfectly. You can't fall. What is Sukham? Oh, you have to smile when you do it. Now, this is unfortunately piecemeal. This is what's happening. I was a part of a syllabus committee. I was part of preparing a handbook. I gave them about 50 pages of content under one of these boards. To my greatest shock, when the book was published, my entire content was ripped apart. It appeared across the book in different places. This is how the students are studying without any continuity. The greatest danger here would therefore be that A, asana is projected as yoga, B, dhyanam is taken out of yoga. These are, it essentially is Buddhist practice now, which is why Indika did this Hindu meditation symposium. Very important because they are appropriating dhyanam out of the yoga corpus. And I have people telling me, do you also teach meditation? We teach yoga and pranayama, yoga and meditation. I'm like, what are you trying to tell me? And therefore, there is a need for this pedagogy, for people to understand Yoga Sutra pedagogy, bring it forward so that yoga retains its core. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You have a question?
I have a question. I have two actually. One is whether there is a particular way of chanting the Yoga Sutras, because I studied them and I chant them in a particular way. I'll demonstrate one. Atha yoganushāsanam. Now, how should we chant according to the swara which is correct?
Here the swaras were given by Krishnamacharya and Desikacharya. Since it is smriti, it is not governed by swara like the shruti.
Yes.
So we chant slightly different,
It's
but the
okay.
fact is chanting has to be done.
There is no problem in that. There is no.
This is what my ācārya has told us, that
Yes.
since it is not shruti, then you can have different kinds of swaras.
Yes. One more thing, in yoga itself is a darshana, which is commonly clubbed with Ayurveda, which is an Upaveda.
Yes.
So how do we bring in that yoga itself is a pedagogy? It's not required that yoga has pedagogy. Rather, yoga is a way of looking at. Yeah.
It's a way of looking at mind, and Manasa Chikitsa is a part of Ayurveda. The problem is postural yoga. Everyone thinks yoga is standing on your head. They don't realize that there's a mental
How
component.
can we say that yoga itself is a pedagogy? Instead of saying there is pedagogy in yoga, is it possible to say
If
yoga
yoga
is
is
pedagogy?
introduced formally as curriculum,
Yes. Yeah, thank
they
you so
study
much.
yoga, but they study only posture. They're not studying Yoga Sutra.
Nrithya ji, amazing. I can't tell you how relevant this is and how important this is. So passionate and so critical. In the name of all this, popularizing yoga, I went through, like somebody invited me to this, like June 21, everybody does these sessions. And somebody said, I'm running space for yoga and everything. At the end of it, she was a friend, so I went to it. And at the end of it, they had this reading of Mahabharata. She said, I want all of you all to read this one page. And I don't know what translation it was. It was, Dharma abusing Karna and using bad language and stuff like that. And then, she's like, this is how, the elitist language. I don't want you all to, react. I want you to absorb and then internalize. And some rubbish, I'm sorry to say, but this is what is happening in the name of yoga. And all that Purva Paksha that you presented, my blood boils. To even read it and keep composure and to respond, which is actually what is required. So I think hats off. The second thing I wanted to say is that the origin of yoga, etc. Patanjali was a Shaivite and he received his knowledge in Chidambaram. And the Agama tradition actually, Charya, Kriya, Yoga, Jnana, yoga is an integral part of the path to liberation. And if we believe the tradition that it's part of Agama is Veda Agama Maya Prokta, it came along with creation itself. So it is a Vedanga, it is, without origin, it is of divine origin. And actually we're doing some study on just taking out the yoga part of, the Agama and documenting it. So we'll hopefully talk about it. But amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think also there's the part of the problem is that some of the yoga teachers, if say about 50, 60 years ago, went and taught these postures to the Americans, to the Westerners, and that's how they understood it, and that became popular. So I've also heard from some people, from insiders, that they shouldn't have been taught because they didn't have the adhikara.
They didn't have
so
the
you let
adhikara.
it out, and then once you let it out, then it will take a life of its own. So,
Also, the idea of viniyoga, tasya bhumi, there is a bhumi at which you teach. You can't teach everything to everyone. And that was completely gone.
Thank you for the presentation. Somebody, a yoga teacher told me to get into the right body to do yoga. So I'm still waiting for the...
Namaste. I have two comments. So one is a comment to Shripada's question on yoga as a pedagogy, and it is true in all disciplines. Yoga is a pedagogy. So I've studied the disciplines, the various disciplines from Natya to Ayurveda, and they use all of them use yoga as a pedagogy. I mean, all the asanas, pranayam, japa, they all use all that. So it is definitely used as a pedagogy also. My question to you is that, so at the same time as Krishnamacharya was there were other yoga proponents also who revived Hatha Yoga. For example, Shivanand Swami, Rishikesh. Did they have a different approach to the Yoga Sutras, or did they have, I mean, were they in communication with each other, or how did they...
See, what I understand is Swami Shivananda was a Vedantin.
Yes, he was a Vedantin.
Within his framework, yoga was a part of sadhana.
Yes.
Krishnamacharya was a yogacharya who studied the Yoga Sutra for the purpose of teaching yoga. Therein lies the difference between them. They were contemporaries.
Yes, yes.
They both did a lot.
Yes, yes.
But Krishnamacharya's role is different there because he was a yoga teacher teaching yoga, making yoga accessible and understandable, relatable.
Okay, thank you. But it was wonderful. I really liked your presentation, and yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Just one comment. Like she said, blood boils, but I can't even take it seriously when they say, there are no references and that. No. Because Sangeet Ratnakara starts with, it's a text on music, but it starts with this, and it starts with also elements of Ayurveda and things like that. A very short point on whether this can in itself be a way of knowing, an epistemology in itself. Obviously, because it is a way of knowing the world. The inner world and the outer world.
And it comes down to mind.
It comes down to the mind.
Has to be.
And hence it's not, it does not, require to have pedagogical tools, but it's a pedagogy in itself because it teaches you to look at the world, the inner and the outer world in a certain way. And it's the same thing with the arts as well. So they're all complete knowledge systems in themselves. The other very small comment is we are facing the same problem with music, where there is a whole sort of dismantling of the knowledge system to serve certain purposes. And then you have like voice training for this. You have yoga for dance. You have yoga for singing a certain kind of music, and you have another breathing exercise, certain other kind of. This is very disruptive for anybody who wants to look at any knowledge system as a whole. So.
Good point.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. That was a wonderful presentation. So just I want to make a comment on the discussion that we are having, that whether, the earlier gurus should have gone to West and have taught, the foreigners about yoga. I kind of, disagree with that. They should not have. Because, and obviously I have read the works of Rajiv Malhotra, the digestion thing, and I fully appreciate that. But I think what the gurus were doing, and I will take the example of Paramahansa Yogananda, who was teaching Kriya Yoga. He was doing it under a certain context. Like when he was teaching Kriya Yoga to Americans, they were not able to, catch hold of their breath. So he, on spot, he devised a technique, up, down. So your breath goes up, down. He was doing like this. So that was actually in a context. But when we are magnifying it on a universal level, that is not a yoga practice. You are diluting it. But we have to understand those gurus at what times they are operating and on what context they are operating.
But one thing with also the Yogananda tradition, possibly also Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, many of these masters, they focused on transcendence. But
Yeah.
process sometimes was, not everyone can transcend. You need a process.
Yeah.
The process is the pedagogy,
Yeah.
which is why it is safer to rely on what is there and then evolve. Because what Yogananda did cannot be replicated by anyone. It's
Yeah.
impossible because
Yeah.
he was at that state.
Yeah, yeah.
Therefore, the need for Anushasana.
Yeah. So the contextual part that I was focusing on, so the times are different, they are operating in a different context.
Yes, indeed.